So, welcome to Out of the Blue, a podcast about all the great things that come out of the Technical University Delft, specifically industrial design engineering. We're now in the IDE arena with a very special guest, which is Donald Norman. He needs no introduction. Maybe we will give an introduction, but still. This is also important, special, because we have a live audience here. Say hello. Nice, of students, and most of these students have been preparing for today by exploring Donald Norman's work, quotes, and all the things he said, and they have shown that to him and sort of talked about that. And then there's a final great thing, is that we're now working together with our let me call this the master. It's called Infuse, and it's the master of Design for Interaction community. So the students that take care of our master Design for Interaction community, and they will be doing most of the questions. So for that, we have Frederik Ueberschär over there. Say hello, Frederik.
Hi.
Good. And we have Caisael Beardow.
Perfect pronunciation.
Thank you so much. And they'll be basically asking most of the questions to you, and I'll be directing this talk.
And you will be you.
I cannot help but be me. Do we need to introduce Donald Norman in any way? Donald Norman is often described as a design guru, or he doesn't want to be called a usability expert, but he's one of the people that started the whole movement of user-centered design very early on. I mean, evangelized it might be a better word. And from that, he moved on, wrote books about emotional design, about the invisible computer, about the design of future things. And the last 5 years, he's looking at Design X, at designing sort of systems and people, and also trying to solve bigger problems and the role of designers in that. Am I describing it right?
Well, sort of. It's kind of always amusing that this is the person who needs no introduction,
Yeah,
so therefore I will introduce him.
No, I checked my producer and he said, yes, you have to do it. Okay, so let's go with this. And with that, I give the word to Frederik. Is that good?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So again, thanks for being here and taking your time. So I think the first question we want to start off, like we saw this clip earlier of you and Paul Hackert having this conversation, and then you pointed out or called the TU Delft the best design school in the world. And I think we wanted to ask why. Why do you think that this is such a great design school?
I'm tempted to say, well, that's because the competition is so weak. So I believe both, by the way, that the competition is weak and that Delft is pretty unique. And here's why. I think here's a problem, is that design is a fairly new subject in universities. It used to be basically a trade, and it was a craft. And so most design schools come out of art and architecture. And even the standalone schools are like SCAD, the Savannah College of Art and Design. And art and design is often in the name of schools, OCAD, the Ontario College of Art and Design, and so on. And we are not art. We are different from art. Because what artists are, they do wonderful work, and they try to provoke, and they try to make statements, and they design for themselves in many ways, or make a statement about the world. And that's important and wonderful, and I love beautiful objects. I have a lamp that was made by artists in Chicago at the Art Institute, School of the Art Institute. And it's a beautiful lamp. I love it. I won a prize in Milano by the student. And so I own it. But it doesn't give any light. It's got this really beautiful piece of wood, and it's got fiber optic pulled inside, and then laboriously little holes drilled all around and little fiber strands pulled through the holes. So it's like stars in the night. It's speckles. And that's art, and it's wonderful, but don't call it a lamp for reading or for lighting up something. But that's design. It's a craft. But in this modern world, in the 21st century, I want to solve problems in healthcare or in education or poverty. And these craft skills are of no use. There are some things that are in common, which is we solve interesting and important problems and we try to solve the right problem. But all these craft skills, no, they're not necessary. So one thing I want to do is change the way design is taught. And I'm actually just finished writing an article about this. It'll be published eventually in the journal Shaji. The Chinese journal comes out of Shanghai, Tongji University, which I think is the best journal in the world now today because it actually has deep opinion pieces in it. And actually there's a big piece coming out in the same journal about design education from Delft with about 5 different authors, Ina, P.J. Stoppers, I'm not sure who the others are. And it's interesting because I use Delft as my example of one of the best design schools. And in part, I then had a discussion with Ina and with P.J. Stoppers about why that might be. And you know what? It's because Delft didn't start out with traditional design. It didn't come from an art school. It came from engineers. And the original people had PhDs in engineering and medicine and psychology and other fields. And that's why I think it's the best school, because actually these fields are fields of deep thinkers who understand what it means to do a deep analysis of a problem. And most designers do not have that skill. Most designers are ignorant of the real world, ignorant of careful, scholastic, scholarly research. And if you're doing a new teapot or you're doing a new beautiful object, it doesn't matter. But if you're doing poverty or hunger, it really does matter. Because our designs are only successful if we understand the politics and the economics and the cultures of the world. And I see that in Delft. I see that in the people. And now more and more designers in universities are required to have PhD degrees. And you know what? They're getting PhD degrees from designers who don't understand what a PhD degree is, and so they're worthless degrees. And the stuff that gets published is often nonsensical. And when I go to design conferences, like professional conferences, like the Industrial Design Society of America, here's a paper, a typical paper from them. I designed this. Isn't it wonderful? And I designed that. Isn't that wonderful? And I also designed this and that and that. And I don't learn anything at all. And I go to these conferences to learn. What I want somebody to do is say, I designed this. But you know what? I started out designing this, and it was a disaster. And I learned that I should change this, and here's what I learned, and here's how I did it, and here's how I modified it, and here's the lessons I learned that you might apply to the work you do. They never do that because I think they're ashamed of saying I didn't do it right. I'm proud of the stuff I didn't do right because that's how you learn. So Delft is the place I can come to and talk about people. And it's interesting because I spent all day yesterday at Philips Design. And I actually, in some sense, I felt like I had died and gone to design heaven because Philips Design was doing everything I've always wanted designers to do. They're looking at medicine and healthcare and staying alive and being well. They're looking at it as a system. And they're looking at the journey that a patient takes, but not just the patient, but the physician takes and the family takes and the technical people take and all the people that are involved in keeping you healthy and alive and well. And they spend a year or 2 years understanding a problem and then defining what the product ought to be. They don't wait for somebody to tell them what to build. They say what should be built. And where did most of those people get trained? It turns out most of those people were trained in Delft.
Wonderful. Ooh. So do you want to elaborate on that, or is?
I think what's very interesting is what I think also makes Delft stand out from other schools is that we are very method-based here. So we're proud of the Delft Design Guide in nearly every course. It is pushed that you use a certain method. How do you see the role of instinct and gut feeling in design? Is it something that designers should focus more on and also listen to more often?
Gut feeling.
Gut feeling. That's a technical term, I suspect.
Yes. Then the magic happens.
That's how artists work.
I know.
I do not want your gut feelings in trying to make me healthier. or trying to tell me how to solve hunger or the economic crisis or other things that are happening in the world. No. I want careful, studied understanding of what the real underlying issues are. And there is a slight case where that's appropriate, because when you become an expert in a topic, that you have, it's internalized, all of the knowledge, and most of our behavior is subconscious. We're unaware of it. So when you become a full expert, quite often you can see a problem and your subconscious presents an answer, and you often don't know where it comes from. We often say it's intuitive, because to me, intuition, the definition is, I don't know how I arrived at that answer. But that isn't because it's automatic. That's because I've studied it for so many years that the answer comes out. So in some sense, that's a gut instinct. But I only want it after, because of the problems we're talking about are far too severe to let somebody, why don't we do this? I heard a talk by a very famous designer in Chicago who says the problem with education is, look at these schoolhouses. They don't have windows in them. Not enough windows. Of course education is so bad. God.
Do you agree with that, or do you think it's...
I think it's utter nonsense.
Okay.
Utter nonsense. It was spoken with no evidence, except it was because it was my gut feeling. It was self-evident. When I actually said, what are you talking about? It's obvious, he said. How can you learn something when there's no natural light?
Okay. So I would say sort of the gut feeling, you might want to call it serendipity. So
No. Serendipity is a very different thing.
Yeah.
Serendipity is when you do something, maybe accidentally, or you just read something, or you learn from somebody else something, and you say, oh my goodness, I can make use of that. But accidentally, you discover something, but you now takes intelligence and reason to actually take advantage of that serendipitous find. And actually, if you look in science, there are many people who have accidentally done things and thrown it away. And there's just a few people who accidentally do the same thing and say, oh, wait a minute. So being able to take advantage of a serendipitous result is what the true creative experts are good at.
Yeah, so that's what sort of, you have to have a rich bath of sort of saturated material, knowledge, and then you give
the
it
mind. It's the well-prepared mind
Right.
that can take advantage of these coincidences or...
So that's where the sort of gut feeling or serendipity comes in, when you have...
Oh, I'm happy to use gut feelings, but I don't stop there. I don't say, oh, the gut feeling says this. I'll say, oh, my gut feeling says this. Let me examine it in depth.
That's it, yeah. Wonderful.
Yeah, and following on from that, I'm interested to know more about these serendipitous occurrences in your own design process, your own work. And more specifically, have you had any serendipitous moments that have changed the course of your design process in a very clear, fundamental way? Have you had any moments where you've completely changed your mind or opinion about something that you were previously completely convinced of?
That's the wrong question. The correct question is...
There's no wrong questions, you said. No, okay.
The correct question is, have I ever had a time when I did not have a serendipitous occasion or when I did not change my mind? So here's an example. If you ask me what book I'm going to write next, I will tell you. And then when the book comes out, you will see it has nothing to do with what I told you. Because in the process of writing the book, I changed my mind 1,000 times. In writing the book, I discover all sorts of things I didn't understand or didn't know, or I find myself writing something that, I disagree with, but maybe that's right. And you heard me earlier telling people that the human-centered design process that I advocated, which you start with careful design research, and then you do this, and then you do that, and do that. No, that's not the best way to do it. Because the more I thought about it, the more I watched myself and I watched other people. A lot of designers don't start by doing deep research on the problem. They start by building something. And in fact, it has an official name today. It's called research by design. I build something and I try it out, and wow, I fully expect you to be wrong, by the way. But by building something first, I learn so much from the reaction that I continue. And so that's a different kind of method, but it's consistent. So it's both wrong. I was both wrong and right. But this happens to me all the time. I'm always second-guessing myself and changing my mind. And people complain that I'm always changing my mind. And I say, yeah, when I learn new facts and learn new things, I change my mind. What else should I do?
Yeah.
Would you argue then that perhaps it's worrying if you encounter someone who very seldom changes their mind about something?
Oh, it's absolutely worrying. In fact, this really annoys me about politicians, because if a politician changes their mind, they're criticized.
Flip-flop.
Why are you criticizing them? You were just arguing with them that you thought they were wrong, and now they agreed with you, and you say, oh, you changed, see? No. I think that's what evidence is about. The evidence is to guide us in our decision-making and what we do. And if it turns out to contradict what we had done before, all right. Maybe I was wrong before. Or maybe the circumstances were slightly different before. But I don't mind being wrong. But my guide in life is that if anyone's going to prove that I'm wrong, I would prefer it be me.
How do you achieve to ever finish a book then? Like if you're always revisiting and always changing your mind, it sounds a bit frustrating maybe in the end.
No, here's the rule about finishing a book, and this is going to be important for any of you doing a PhD thesis or writing a paper, because when you're doing a thesis, you're always going to have a new idea. And when you're writing it up, you're always going to have another thing, and you may want to change your mind and do this. And so here's the rule that I teach all my students and I follow myself. What is today's date?
13th of November.
I am going to write the book as of my knowledge of the 13th of November. And if I get a different idea, I'm going to write it down someplace and put it aside, and I'll come back to that. After the book is finished, I'll do the work then. Because, it's true, if I got something that contradicted what I just wrote, maybe I should change. But mostly if I get a brand new idea, put it away. I'm going to write my thoughts and ideas as of November 13. There's actually a famous psychologist. His name is world famous child psychologist, Swiss. Anybody? Come on. Somebody must know. Who is a famous child psychologist? Piaget. So Piaget is famous for every morning he would write for a few hours, and then he would go into his laboratory and meet with all of his research assistants and scholars and friends, and he would talk about what he had written, and he'd get ideas and go back and then write the next day. And so the story is that if he would write and he'd come back in the afternoon, and they would all convince him that he was wrong, he wouldn't change what he had written. But what he would do is the next day he would start by saying, on the other hand.
So every page starts with on the other hand. Wonderful.
Yeah. And when we speak about iteration and changing things and then bringing it back to education, then here, how do you think we should evolve our education, and how should we move forward into the future to work on these wicked problems that you mentioned earlier?
I believe fundamentally our education is wrong for the 21st century, because the kinds of problems we are facing today are problems that are huge, massive systems, complex. A lot of the things that we've taught in the past teaches us how to build the kinds of wonderful devices, tools, products that are destroying the environment. And we have to stop that. And what should we do in turn, and how do we address these big problems? And as I have said before, the craft education that is so prevalent in design is the wrong education. It's still wonderful for people who want to build beautiful things, and I think they should continue because I love beautiful things. But if you're going to do healthcare, that's a different kind of talent that's required, and we must change the education to do that. But I don't want to lose the wonderful creativity that designers have. Because I'll tell you, I'm still an engineer at heart. My original training was engineering, and so I can really think about a problem and create what I consider to be not a bad solution. But let me tell you, it's ugly and not inspiring. And when I give it to a good designer, they can take my very ideas and transform it into ways that are wonderful and beautiful, and I have to work with them all the time. And I don't want to lose that either. But design is not a single topic. It's many different topics and requires many different skills. And on top of that, we have to build on the skills of the people in the technology, in the medical field, and in economics, and in finance, and in business, and many other fields. And so how do we do that? How do we educate that? And the answer is, I don't know.
Good.
However, the first thing I want to do is state what the issues are and what we must do. Second, what I'm hoping is that the result of the chapter I've written for this special issue of Caisael on design education will lead people to rethink. And I've now gotten at least one company that is excited by this possibility. And what I said is what we say in our paper, that if you take a look at other fields, medicine, law, the business schools, all of them started just like us. They were craftspeople. The people in medicine, they had no real science of medicine in the early days. And the schools of medicine just sort of taught what people thought was good or bad, but with not much evidence. And the same happened in business schools. How do you run a business and what are the components? It was not a science. It was still a craft. And the same happened in law. And what happened was a committee sat down and analyzed what was going on and made a big, influential report. And then for the next several years, people thought about the curriculum and devised a series of curricula because every school could choose which one they wanted to emphasize. And then it took decades to make the change, and that's what's necessary in design. And so IBM right now, IBM Design, which has about 2,000 designers around the world, they are going to help us sponsor a set of conferences, and then hopefully a deep conference that spends a year or two trying to understand the issues and make a report and make recommendations. And so I deliberately don't know the answers because what I want to do is convene a group of people that share the kind of views I have, and ideally that will also disagree with a lot of my views, because it's by disagreement that we make progress. In fact, so an aside, I love to give long answers. There's a big thing about design thinking and oversimplification of design thinking and design. And one of the key things is we do these wonderful creative sessions in which, according to IDEO and D-School, one of the important rules is build on other people's work, never criticize, because criticism dampens the creativity. And they're very proud of the number of ideas that come out of a creative session. Well, I just wrote a paper with Roberto Verganti, who's a designer at the Politecnico in Milano, and which we said, that's nonsense. That in fact, who cares how many ideas you get? We only care about the quality of the idea. We only need one, really, if it's high quality. And how do you get to high quality? You give critiques. And so we said, see, where this comes from is from improv theater, where people are making up the script as they go along. And these people, the creative ones, are really fun and wonderful. And there the rule is, when you finish your piece, make sure the person next has something they can build on. And the person next, the rule there is always say yes and they can build on what went before.
Instead of no but, right?
Instead of no but. And we say, but it's the but that where the power comes, because we're not doing theater. We're trying to create we're not trying to do an immediate, wonderful feeling. So the way this is done today in the design thinking things, everybody comes out, feeling happy and wonderful. I don't want people to come. I don't care if they come out feeling happy and wonderful. I care they come out with a wonderful idea. And so we said critique is the important thing. Except we said we should actually say yes and but. What you said was good, but maybe we could make it better. So the critique should not be throw it away. The critique should be, this part is bothersome. How could we modify this part to make it work better? And that means the person giving the critique has to be supportive, and the person listening to it should not think we're critiquing the person, but we're making a critique to make things better. So I don't remember even the question anymore, but that's my answer.
We're going to have one more question and then round up the tips. So that's...
Yeah, perfect. Well, you mentioned just now about how designers and design educators can learn from other disciplines concerning the way we approach our work in terms of detailed inquiry. And this reminds me a little bit of your work with DesignX. Is that something that you could give us a brief synopsis of for people in the audience who aren't familiar?
Well, PJ Stoppers, who's someplace here, not in this audience, and I wrote a paper which we said, we want to approach the important problems of society, and they're really difficult problems. And we actually said we need a new kind of design, and we said this should be design 2.0. And then we discovered there already was a design 2.0. So we said 3.0. Well, there already was one, and we said, oh, the hell with it, we said, call it design X. And so what we meant was, and we wrote this paper again in the journal Jiaji, we had a conference about this at Tongji University in Shanghai and brought a number of people in. And what we said was, how on earth do we approach these big, complex problems? And how do we even analyze them? How do we know what's going on? And we didn't have answers. What we had, though, was the questions that we want design in the future to address. But we also were guided by a paper by Jeremy Meyerson, from the Royal College of Art and Imperial College, who had done this wonderful problem of the ambulances in the city of London. And it turns out that ambulances are normally at the hospital, and when there's an accident or incident, they're called and they have to go out to the center of the city and then come back in. And they said, well, why don't we keep the ambulances in the center of the city? So when they're called, they're closer to the scene. And so they actually redesigned ambulances so they could have the right kind of equipment, and they redesigned the processes. They did a lot of really good fundamental work. It took them many years. And the mayor of London loved it, and all sorts of people loved it. And so at this conference, they talked about that. Jeremy talked about it, and I asked, well, that's really exciting and wonderful. That's the kind of problem we're talking about. So how has it worked out? And he said, well, it never got implemented. And I realized that the problem there was not trying to understand the problem or possible solutions, but you must understand the culture and politics. And the reason it wasn't implemented was that it interfered with people's lives. You could have these ambulances in the middle of where people are living. And then it also changed the way that the ambulance workers would work and the way that the fire and the police people would work. And the unions were not happy, and a lot of other people were not happy. And it became a big political nightmare.
And then you're basically putting out fires everywhere, where you sort of should look at the whole system as a sort of a complete thing.
And one thing we learned, and that's what I'm doing in my more recent work, is when you have a big problem and you have this big solution, forget it. Do the big solution, but actually the world has spent billions and billions of dollars where experts come in and see the problem and advocate an appropriate solution that will cost billions of dollars, and it becomes a political nightmare. Because no matter what the solution, if it costs a lot of money, there are people who think we should spend it elsewhere. And if it's going to help a lot of people, it will also hurt some people. And so what you should do, you should think about the solution, and then you should wait for an opportunity. A small opportunity to do a small step, and you'll learn from that. And if it succeeds, it makes it easier to do the next step. And if it fails, people won't notice. It's a small thing. And so it may take 10 years, but it's going to take 10 years anyway. But moreover, in those 10 years, the world changes. And this way, if you had a big project, you couldn't change the project. But if you're doing it small and incrementally, you can modify it. There's a famous paper in political science that discusses this, and it's become our Bible.
In the meanwhile, we'll start talking about the tips that we have for the audience to consume. And today I have no tips, but our people from the Infuse Master Dispute have some. So,
yeah, should I start?
Yes, please.
Okay. So yeah, my cool thing of the week is it's a short 15-minute video on YouTube. Earlier we talked about how YouTube is now kind of the platform for education. And this is a video by Vanity Fair featuring Ueberschär, I hope I pronounced this right, who was the cinematographer of the Joker movie that just came out. And he talks about how he uses color to transport meaning and emotion to the viewer. It's very entertaining to watch, but also educational about colors in general and how filmmakers use it. And yeah, I think you can relate some of these things back to design, but it's also just like a nice 15-minute watch.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, fantastic. My tip for consumption is The Semantic Turn by Klaus Krippendorf. It's a very long and arduous read, but definitely worth it in my opinion. It's a very complex design theory book that explores product semantics, which Krippendorf describes as a systematic inquiry into how people attribute meanings to artifacts and interact with them accordingly. And it also looks at how we as designers can apply these product semantics, both as a methodology and a vocabulary for designing them in light of these meanings that they have. So I think this would be a really good read for anyone who's interested in design theory, but also its application to these complex sociocultural systems that we live in. And I think regarding our conversation today about how everything exists within a system, and as designers we need to be more system-minded as opposed to object and entity-minded, I think that could definitely be a good read. If you can get through the whole thing, it really is worth it, I promise.
It is hard work. I also promise that. Actually, let me combine those two, because the way you describe the end result is exactly what we need. And I find that I often get inspiration from artists, and in video case, for example, and because I don't want to use the art, but I use the creativity of the artists who think about the world in new and different ways. And the also thing is science fiction. I love really good science fiction writers because when you are trying to imagine the future, you have to imagine a world and you have to imagine the things that populate the world and you have to think about it. It's the same with us in cinema because it's easy to do a design future. I'm going to show you what this object might be. But what really matters is how it's actually used in the world, in real life. And if you're doing a cinema, you must actually show real people interacting in real life. And quite often the advanced, very sophisticated stuff is shown on the side. It's not the focus of the film. But if you look carefully, there's a lot of deep thought about how these things might be used and how they might change your life. And science fiction writers are also especially good at that when they write their novels, because again, they have to show how it actually happens in real life. And so that's where I like to take inspiration. Wonderful. So that combines both of your tips.
Then I'm going to add one level on top of that. There's a very nice book that instrumentalizes that. That's called Make It So by Nathan Shedroff and Chris Newsell, who works at IBM Design. Mm-hmm. And that's a sort of very thoughtful an analysis of science fiction movies and how they how the user interfaces there influenced our products and the other way around. It's really nice read. So with that, we're at the end of the podcast. So first of all, I want to thank our speaker, Donald Norman, to be here with us today. And then we have our two wonderful guests. I'm so happy that we have students asking the questions. So thank you, Frederik Ueberschär and Caisael Beardow. Thank you again. And of course, I always thank our wonderful producer, Mark de Kool. And our technical support, Geraldo Solisa. And with that...
No. Because I want to thank the audience and the questions, because I always learn. When I'm asked a question, I always learn from the questions, and I learn from the audience, so thank you.
Thank you so much for being here today. Yes, that's wonderful. So thank you.